Dear writer, you need to quit. This is the show that helps you know what to quit, what to keep, and what to question. My name is Becca Syme, and I'm a Gallup certified strengths coach with thousands of hours of coaching 6 and 7 figure authors, mid-listers, major award winners, and new authors alike because everyone needs to quit something. Anyone can tell you what worked for them, and of course, they say it might not work for you, but they can't tell you why. Well, I can tell you why. Welcome to the QuitCast. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 39 and the end of season 1 of the QuitCast. We're super excited to do positivity today, which is one of the strengths in the Strengths for Writers program, which is based on the Clifton Strengths Assessment results. If you have more information about that, please do check it out. The Clifton Strengths program is fascinating, and we are working through methodically each one of the 34 strengths. And today, I believe we're on number 14 of the ones that we've covered. So we are ending season 1 with positivity, which is extremely fun to talk about. Of course, the positivity people are up with people, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit at first about what positivity can look and sound like. And that's going to be with Terry and Becca. So take it away.
My positivity is number 7.
7.
Yeah.
And mine's 12, I think, 11 or 12. And so having high positivity, we were talking about this in the recording yesterday about how positivity people kind of have an aura, like they have a presence. They kind of just make you want to smile when you're around them.
Right.
Like not even, sometimes I don't think they even do it intentionally. It's just kind of a feeling that you get. And I feel like I can see positivity people in a crowd.
How many people have friends and family have I
A
had?
lot. You have
now?
several high
Yeah, like
positivity
50.
people.
And
Yeah.
I've got several high, several medium, and several low. And I noticed that it's how quick that soaks in or comes up. The high positivity, you're right. It's like an aura or a thing, but it also it's weird. It's weird to watch stuff bounce off them and then just kind of slowly dissipate. How does that affect a person's writing? I can see how it could affect their business life for sure.
Oh, yeah. And we often talk about high positivity people as being like a spark. And I do think that there's something of that spark in like your social media presence or the marketing that you might do. You can tell that you have a high positivity because you don't even consider the negative sometimes. Like not just that it doesn't get you down, but like it's not on your radar when you're thinking about even like very controversial topics, right? Things that are hard to talk about. The positivity is just sort of like, we can do this, like we can make this work, whichever side they land on topics about. It doesn't have to be, includerish, but it's very interesting.
It is. I've got another story. I won't share deep details, but I know someone, I've got a really close friend who's number 2 positivity. And there's been some crazy things happen in their life, which I look at those things and think, oh my goodness, these are horrible. And we've talked about it. And that person actually said to me the one day, I am so grateful that these horrible, bad things are happening to me. And I said, what? Why? And they said,
Because they can handle
because I'm so able to deal with this. Can you imagine if
Yeah.
someone who couldn't handle this was afflicted with these kind of things, how that would crush them? With me, I'll deal with it. I'll fix it. And it'll be great. Yeah. It'll all end up being great. But can you imagine if someone didn't have the ability to deal with it, which was, to me, it blew my mind on how super positive.
That's some peak positivity right there. And of course, if they have a number 2 positivity, and this is kind of how JJ was on the podcast, right? Yeah. Like there's just no first thought of
negative.
Like that we can't handle this, or this, not that they can't be critical. Plenty of positivity can be critical, and actually on some level, if the positivity isn't getting fed, they can be worse than people who don't have high positivity. Because when they get into a situation, when a high positivity is in a situation that they can't see out of, or they can't change, or their positivity takes a hit, or they aren't in like strength level positivity, they have a capacity for it. Like you said, talent theme, they have a
Yeah.
talent, but it's not being utilized, like then positivity can actually be a negative force because it's so like disappointed or not being utilized in the right way. And it's interesting, a lot of the positivity people that I used to coach when I would do like in organizations and nonprofits and stuff previously, it'd be the positivity person who goes seeking coaching is like, I can't handle the situation and I don't understand why I
Mm.
can't, because I can always handle everything. What's going on? And you would talk to them about like the toxic environment they're in and they have no outlet for positivity. No one is supporting their positivity. So like a person with a high positivity who has another friend who has that, who can help them, lift them up and remind them that everything's going to be okay and infuse their positivity, they can handle so much more. But when you don't have that, it almost turns into like the vampire situation where it drains you.
So
And
where
that's hard to watch.
Right. So where a normal person with lower positivity in their strengths might be overwhelmed or feel themselves drowning, a person with higher positivity can still find themselves in that position, but when they do, they're more apt to swim higher and faster to try to find a way out. Like we were talking about
They get
adaptability
out of the
before.
situation. Like they're
Right.
more likely to try to get out.
That's
Yeah.
great. That's
Yeah.
great.
I would say it depends. I mean, to caveat that, of course, like it does depend on what's keeping them in the situation. And I think that's part of like
Sure.
and we've talked about this before, like where does your adaptability fall, where does your ranger fall, where are these other things that where's your futuristic that cause you to either look forward or be more resilient in the moment. The lower those things are and the higher the positivity, when the positivity gets offended, sometimes they can not look to quit quick enough.
Right.
Like and that was these three situations I had in particular were almost exactly the same, where they were in this toxic environment, number one, number two, or number three positivity, and they did not think about quitting. They couldn't even conceive of quitting.
Because they'd have what, maximize or developer or something around where it would keep
It'd be
flavoring
like,
it, and we can keep
I
trying.
can
We
make
can
this
do this.
work. Why can't I make it better? Or on the flip side, their adaptability was so low. Like I had one of these people was literally number 34 adaptability. And when I sat down with her for the second coaching call, I was like, why don't you quit? And she looked at me and she was like, I never thought of that. And
Right.
not in a like, I never thought of that.
She
Like, that's not
genuinely never thought of that.
literally,
Yeah.
she never even
Never occurred to her.
considered
Yeah.
that she could quit, but it was oppressing her. And so I always say with positivity people, like, be conscious
Oh,
of the negative influences in your life and be conscious of how close you let them into, into towards your positivity. I talk about positivity like being a well where you have sort of an unlimited source of positive energy that you can keep filling up because the internal sort of hopefulness inside of you will just keep filling it up. And even somebody with a fairly, I would say, mid-high positivity, like I would still expect this to happen at 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 with positivity because it's just so consistent. But when something pokes a hole in that, well, it is fairly devastating, and really the only way to get around it is to exit the situation. One thing that I notice a lot with high positivity writers is the the hopefulness of positivity, and things like activator or achiever that pair with it can and this is what I meant about the strengths flavoring each
oh
other a
yeah.
lot, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like you think you can do so much more than you can, or you think you should have so much more capacity than you do. And it can really cause some negative drain when you push up against reality and like what the industry is really like. Because in the Strengths for Writers podcast, we talked about positivity people being the not cheerleaders really, but sort of the cheerleaders of the industry, where it's like, we've all got this, we're all okay, it's going to be fine, like don't be scared, that kind of a thing. But then there's this flip side of positivity that's also like, sometimes thinking that you can do everything is actually what's getting you in trouble. And so being conscious of where the positivity line is, as far as, is it being generative for you or is it being destructive?
Right.
Right.
Is it causing you to take on too much, which is getting in the way of your productivity and production because you're so positive you can handle it all? Or, yeah.
Yeah.
And
I am so excited today to have three fabulous authors who all have high positivity here to talk with us, and they're peak positivity people. Absolutely the middle of the line when it comes to showing what the strength looks like. And so we wanted to do a little interview with them and ask them a few questions about their process and how positivity can apply to their writing and their work in the industry. But first, I want to introduce you to them and let you know a little bit about who they are. So, Sienna Snow is a writer of contemporary and erotic romance with stories weaved about smart, successful women who know what they want and alpha men who steal their hearts. And Sienna is a number three positivity. JJ Austrian worked in Los Angeles as a TV executive in the 90s, but was never able to sell any of his own scripts. After moving to Minnesota to be closer to his wife's family, JJ realized he was basically an overgrown 15-year-old and earned his MFA in creative writing for children and young adults at Hamline University. His first picture book, Worm Loves Worm, was published by Balzer and Bray HarperCollins in 2016 and was the winner of the Minnesota Book Award. JJ considers himself a 30-year overnight success, and you can hear that number one positivity even in his intro. And finally, we have Zoe York. A year after Zoe self published her first sexy Canadian small town romance in 2013, she was laid off from her day job. She leapt at the definitely too soon opportunity to write full time. And 6 years later, she's written more than 50 romances and one nonfiction book on writing genre fiction series. And Zoe is a number two positivity. And so I hope you enjoy the Strengths for Writers talk show, and I'll see you at the end to talk a little bit about where to go from here.
The not being able to tolerate negativity piece. In fact, what JJ was saying about not thinking of yourself as nice, I can often be super harsh about negativity. Like I shut it down quickly, that strong boundary. Yeah, that's the part that
Nice.
resonates with me.
Nice. Yeah, that's very positivity. JJ, what about you? What stood out the most?
Yeah, the negativity. Like when I'm around someone who's just never ever finding anything good, it really, like you said, it is an emotional drain. And I just will just walk away from that person. I mean, I can think of 3 situations just recently where I was at events and someone was just being just just Eeyore. I mean, just to the point of it's like, and I was trying to point out like, oh yeah, well that's bad, but that's not in your control. You can't control that. So why don't you try this? Or that's really hard. That's really crummy about publishing, but you can always try. And they just didn't want to hear it. And I was just finally like, hey, I'm gonna go get a drink now, and I just made sure not to go near that person because I was like, I don't need that. Life is too short.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Both the negativity and kind of the life of the party kind of thing, because I'm at a retreat right now with my girlfriends, and literally I put it together. We're laughing. I start everything, and they're so good that I feed off of their happiness and the joy. And like right now, they're all laughing downstairs, and it's because I did something stupid. I tripped up the stairs coming up, and they thought it was hilarious. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go do my podcast. And then it's just so positive. And I've been around such energy suckers that literally those girls had to be like, you need to get away from this. Because I guess it's like when my energy goes down, the whole group's energy goes down.
Yeah. Especially because some of us also have woo, and we haven't done woo yet on the Strengths for Writers podcast, but there's an awful lot of like woo and significance have a lot of impact on other people as well. And so, yeah, your ability to be positive raises the bar in any situation. And I would say that about all of you. I think that's true. And the interesting thing is, of course, positivity and restorative are kind of a little bit opposite. And we did the restorative podcast, and we talked about the importance of valuing criticism and valuing critique and valuing people who point out problems. And I made a comment in the part that didn't end up on the podcast about how, as a positivity, I have a hard time being around people who point out criticism all the time, because I feel like it brings the tenor of the room down when people are being very critical. And one of the girls said, which I was really appreciative for as a strengths person, she said, would you rather not know? Like, if there's a problem, would you rather not know that there's a problem? To which I said, oh, I know there's a problem. I just don't care about it. Like, I don't care. That's somebody else's problem, right? But how have you seen this at work in your writing career? Like, as a positivity author, your presence in the industry or yourself as in a group of people, how do you find positivity can influence maybe even other writers or your career? Let's start with JJ.
With other writers, you know, as I was saying, you know, I try and always just point out, you know, what can you be in control of? You can't control so many things, either whether you're in self-publishing or traditional publishing or hybrid, you know, and you always hear like, oh, you need more ad buys or you need to do this marketing. And I'm sure a lot of that all works and some doesn't, but the main thing is, okay, you can control your writing. You know, how good is your story?
Yeah.
Are you focusing on stuff that really excites you? Are you having fun writing your stories? And, you know, these can be thrillers or dark things, but it needs to excite you, because I really think that comes through. And I have to remind myself of that sometimes. It's like, hey, this is supposed to be fun.
Yeah, I like that. You are number one positivity, JJ. I told you.
Yeah.
Zoe, what about you? How do you see positivity in your author career?
So I always like to look at, I'm also futuristic. I think, did JJ, is Sienna futuristic too?
Sienna.
So I think that, I don't know where this is just positivity or where the futuristic comes into that, but I like to always be thinking, you know, down the road, I see the various potentials. Like, it's not like there's one option, like kind of like what JJ said about everybody says you should do X. Well, should is, you know, that like that's a whole podcast to itself.
Yeah.
But that it's not
QTT.
X. There's literally like a whole alphabet of options there for you. And the one right one for me or for another author that I'm talking to is going to be so specific that it actually means like there's endless pivot opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I feel like for me, positivity in my career has just been, you know, always being able to see those endless options, which I guess is also I'm number one, ideation, number two, positivity.
Yeah.
So it's like, let's find another option. Let's just, I'm sure there's another, you know.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And do you have individualization in your top 10? Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah. That's number 5, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that there's a whole alphabet of options. Like, literally, that should go on a t-shirt somewhere, because that's so accurate. So Sienna, what about you? How do you see positivity happening in your author career?
I'm known, like, it's just kind of like, I'm always happy-go-lucky. If there's someone around, I bring you in, I hug you. And it's like, when I go to conferences, they're like, don't be scared of me. I hug everybody, you know, and that's kind of like, people know me for that. And if I'm not smiling, someone's like, what's wrong with her? You know, because it rarely happens. And so that's kind of like, I'm usually known for how, like, you know, I make people feel good and just kind of being happy around them. And a lot of my author friends, for them, I'm their cheerleader. I'm like, you can do it. Even if you write one word today, it's still something, you know, and that's kind of like how I've become known. Even with my girlfriends who are with me tonight, they're like, oh, she's going to start her cheerleader thing, because I feel like if they're in a good mindset, we all succeed. And I'm always about celebrating everybody's little achievement. And so I think that's where, for me, even my readers, they're like, they know I'm always smiling and I'm always going to talk about some silly stuff and things I love. And so I think if I was if anything is negative, I shut down. And so that's why in my writing career, it's really that's the one thing I know people say over and over again. You're always happy. You're fun to be around. You make us smile. So.
Yeah. And I want to highlight something you said too, because I think a lot of positivity people struggle with this about the shoulding that happens. And I'm going to have to do air quotes up here because it looks so strange to do air quotes right here. But I'll do my air quotes. The shoulding, when a positivity person has an instinct about how they should act in a certain situation, like for instance, there's a negative person who's doing a lot of draining of my life. I want to cut them out. I want to not be around them. And there's an awful lot of people who will say things like, no, you have to keep, you can't afford to not have them. You have to give people second chances. You should not cut people out of your life. And I think there's so much of this that's instinctual for the positivity of knowing when it's just not going to benefit you anymore. And part of the reason that I think positivity is so important to understand is that the way that negativity drains someone without positivity, it's sort of like it'll go down and up and down and up. But because positivity is so used to being able to raise the tenor of the situation or the conversation, or have your positivity be reflected back to you on some level, when it's the opposite of that, it's like there's a black hole in front of you and it just sucks everything out. And so the quicker you can get away from negative situations as a positivity, and I like that you were talking about that intuition, because that's just, it's so important to listen to your positivity. I love that. Zoe, we had a conversation once about your positivity in your writing. Talk to me about how you see it. I still remember this conversation. I'm like, oh my goodness.
And in fact, actually, that's what I wanted to talk about when you brought this up. I wanted to definitely cover this anecdote. Yeah. So I have always struggled with the all is lost crisis point in a book. In fact, when I took Write Better Faster, that's the thing I wanted to write better. I wanted to get better at making my characters feel that angst, like it was literally life or death. I once took a Michael Haig workshop, and he talks about how even in a romance, you want it to feel like literal death. And I was like, yeah, how do you do that? I don't know how to do that. I have other writing strengths, but that kind of like low point or black moment in a book has never been my strength. It turns out, now that I've taken the course and done my strengths, it turns out that can be a challenge for high positivity people. Not impossible, because obviously some people do it really, really well. And I have done it too. And because I've done it sometimes really well, I wanted to do it again. I wanted to do it more consistently. I wanted to tap into, how did I do that? Because sometimes it's really hard for me. So how is it that sometimes it's doable and sometimes it feels impossible for me? So one of the things that Becca and I talked about was how crucial it is that the worse you make that crisis moment in a book, you almost have to have like an equal positive balance outcome on the other side. So for example, like having that crisis point for me in like the second last or third last chapter of a novel doesn't work, because there isn't enough of that positivity outcome on the other side. And something that Becca pointed out to me when we were kind of doing that debrief of what does your catalog look like to this point? Which books have you loved writing the most? The stories that I love the most are ones where I've started with the crisis at the very start of the book. And the entire book is a reconciliation of that, like putting a puzzle, like something is terribly broken. Let's fix it. Let's spend 80,000 words just fixing this vase and making it even more beautiful than it ever was before. And that's, I mean, if I could have my story be of benefit to anyone else who's a positivity writer who struggles with typical hero's journey structure, think about maybe trying a different structure. Because if you're really high positivity, then that what might be only a denouement for another writer could be an entire novel for you, and will be a compelling page-turning read, because you're going to find, that really unique, hooky to you voice that just keeps them wanting more of that goodness. But then you have to, I mean, the real struggle is picking the right story where the conflict at the start carries that reconciliation all the way through.
Yeah, and I love the way that you did it in that book, particularly because there's a safety for the positivity that they're going to have a happily ever after, right? Because it's a romance, so but at the same time, what happens in the beginning is so hard. Like the very first, what was it, scene or two or
the first
or
chapter
prologue, maybe? Yeah, of that book was so painful, and you thought, how are they going to recover from this? And then the rest of the book was from the beginning, right? Like you went back to the beginning, and I like that about it too, was that it really was almost like a flashback, I guess, right?
Yeah. So that the book that we're talking about is Love in a Sandstorm, which is in my Pine Harbor series. It's book 6 in the series. It's a standalone read, but like you can read the look inside. The crisis moment is in the first chapter. And then, we jump back in time to when they met. And actually, in hindsight, so that's the book where it was most clearly, oh, this is a different way to tell stories. And it's actually now something I'm going to do a couple of times in the next year and a half, because I love that story narrative structure so much. Your voice, your story's already in you, but strengths can really help pull out and refine it, right?
Yeah, that's a really important point too, because I think like when we were talking before about Worm Loves Worm, and we were talking about how you came to the idea and how you came to the structure, like it's important to say you didn't know that you were positivity at that point. Like you were doing something that was so natural and instinctive for you. And I would say even, and the book that he's working on now is not out yet, so I won't say anything about it, I promise. I'm about to say, but I feel like also the structure of that book on some level, which he had started writing before he ever came into my class, is a very positivity sort of form, because there are things that you trust. And I think this is part of what positivity brings. It's like, when you trust that this is all going to be okay, and that as dark as we go or as hard as it is, it's always going to be okay. But also with JJ's book in particular, there's so much humor. Like there's so much lightness and humor in the narrative, that it's like you feel safe even in the book, in the hard moments. And I would say that about Zoe's voice as well. Sienna, what about you? How do you see positivity in your writing, or have you?
A lot of times some of my current series, it starts off with really bad situations, and it's overcoming those bad, because it starts off and it's a romance. So they start off in a bad place, and it's not always second chance or anything, but like my most recent one, it's in the world of sex trafficking. So it's a really dark subject, and it's these two people who have to rekindle their love in a situation where they can't, it's a bad situation. And that was one of the hardest books I've ever written, because the subject matter is so dark and just horrific. But then the love story turned out to be my reader's favorite love story I've written, because of how they overcame everything in this situation. And so that's like, through all my books, I just want that overcoming that dark. And like Zoe, I have to put it closer to the front of the the dark moment can't happen later, because then my book would be like 200,000 words. Yeah. And it just wouldn't work for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just decided I tried to fit into other people's molds, because I've been told, this is how you write. I've published 100 books, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, it's not working for me. I struggle to fit into someone else's mold. Yeah. And especially if I feel like they're bossing me around, because it's kind of like that mean teacher aspect of it. I can't handle that. So when after I took the class with you, I guess in 2018, I've realized that I got to step away from these people and just write this way. And it works for me.
Yeah. It's so important how intuitive storytelling structure is for so many strengths. And we think that it has to be, and JJ, I'm interested to hear what you think about this, because you come from screenwriting, right? Which is so prescriptive in how you have to tell stories. But I find for myself that so many writers tell their best stories when they let their intuition guide them about how they're going to story tell. And so, just as a for instance, when Zoe and I were talking about this, the going back through her catalog and talking about which books, she immediately went to that book, right? Like it was the very first thing that she thought about, and you could see on her face, like this had made an impact on her as a story that she told. And I thought that's such a positivity story. And as we got deeper into it, you could see the intuition that, you know, had driven her to do that. And so I'm interested, and this is just sort of a side note, JJ, because you do have that background in script writing. Do you feel like you have to follow the storytelling rules, or do you do more intuitive writing, or how does that work?
I kind of do a little of both. When Sienna was talking about these bossy people, I thought about Anne Ursu, who writes middle grade, The Real Boy. She just has a new book that just got nominated for a Minnesota Book Award and a couple others. And I hope she
super brilliant writer. Yeah,
she's amazing, and she was one of my advisors at Hamlin. And she has, we call it now the Anne Ursu rule, which is you can do whatever you want as long as it works.
I love that.
So yeah, and so I mean, I'll tilt my camera here. I mean, there's my board. That's my first book and my second book. All right.
Yeah.
And so what I do with outlining is I do a very loose outline, but then I let the characters walk away from it. And then I have to go back and figure out, and that's happened twice to me. That's why this book's taking a while. I had a character just up and die on me while I was writing a draft, and I did not expect that. That was not in my outline. And I think the old JJ might have tried to force them into the narrative. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Oh my gosh, what are they going to do now? And I'm just kind of sitting there. I'm like, I don't know. And I just started typing, and it kind of let off, and I went back. And I realized, my subconscious was saying, well, no, they have to die because otherwise they're going to get in the way. And so, one of the villains would not want them around. So obviously they're going to be dead. And so that's trusting your intuition, trusting the process, and not, getting too wrapped up in the rules that, and so it's, some people pants, they write and they can do that, and other people have to have the outline, and that's fine. But I think the big thing is all of us as human beings are storytelling animals. And if you're an author or want to be an author, you've obviously been reading and watching TV and movies, and so you understand deep down the structure of a story. Beginning, middle, end. Something bad's got to happen here, or it can't just be all happiness. So, trust that, but also trust, that's not going to be perfect. Be okay with going back and saying, wow, and, maybe you revise it. Maybe you just write another book.
Yeah. I love positivity, even in the way that you're talking about it, right? It's like, well, if it doesn't work, okay. Well, if you do, just write another book. And not that you're doing it offhanded, right? But I love how positivity that phrase is. And this is something I think, if you guys don't know this already, you definitely should, is that the writing community needs positivity in order to balance itself out, right? Because there's so much, and this is a lot of what I feel like I do in my job, is there's so much shoulding, and there's so much negativity, and there's so much fear. And it's like the positivity sun needs to come in and just do a little shining all over the place and say, we're all going to be okay. If it doesn't sell, write another book. If it doesn't work, keep, that it's going to be okay. And I think positivity might downplay that in themselves because it's so natural, but it's so necessary, because people who can't hear that in themselves, they can't manufacture it. They need somebody else to remind them, oh, right, the sun's coming out again. We're going to be okay. So if this is your first introduction to either the Clifton Strengths program or to Strengths for Writers, I highly encourage you to go back and watch the previous Strengths shows that we've done. We've done 13 so far and 14, including this one, of the 34 that there are, and we plan to finish the other 20 this year. Additionally, though, there are some amazing resources at Gallup, and we'll link to those in the show notes. The Theme Thursday YouTube channel is particularly my favorite because they do every single strength in depth, and it's a fantastic resource. And Gallup is, as the IP holder and the content creator for strengths, is definitely the place that you want to go if you have questions about how the program looks. What we do here is we specifically try to translate the strengths into how they look for writers. And so there are a couple of additional resources that I want you to check out. One is the Strengths for Writers Facebook group. Once you take the test and you come in to that group, then you can have some resources of conversations that we've had before. You have an opportunity to ask questions of both me and other people who've taken the test. You can also comment here if you would like, because we try to answer every single comment and question that you have. Some we can't do as in depth as others, but that leads me to the final resource I want to talk to you about. We have a newsletter, which I call a coaching newsletter. And what we do is every week we have a coaching question that's been submitted where the answer is fairly in depth. And sometimes I have to ask questions back and forth of the person in order to get to the core of what they're asking about. And we do both strengths and just writing related questions as well. But that is a place where you get a little bit more in-depth information about how the strengths might act or how to translate this into your writing career. We also have classes and other things. We have a Patreon channel, but those are the main free resources, and I want to point you towards those. So we are ending the first season today of the QuickCast, and next week when we kick off the new season, we're going to also kick off a new series. And if you want to know more about that, you'll have to join us next week. So I'll see you next time on the QuickCast.